Hello, welcome to Edupedia World Greeting. We will talk about the end of the period which modern historians named the Middle Ages. It is the end of the 15th century. As we have said in the previous video, Turks came from Asia Minor and conquered the whole Balkan, the modern-day Greece, Macedonia, Bulgaria, Serbia, Romania and Hungary, thus starting their conquest of the world. By the end of the 15th century and the beginning of the 16th century, Turks conquered the whole of Western Asia, North Africa and Southeastern Europe. Before they succeeded in that task, many European nations tried to oppose them in the Balkan or the Southeastern Europe. However, all of them were eventually conquered by Turks, one by one. The greatest resistance was offered by South Slavic nation, Serbs. The most famous battle between Serbs and Turks was the Battle of Kosovo Field, which occurred in 1389. The leader of the Serbs was Duke Lazar, while Turks were led by Sultan Murad I. Both of these rulers were killed in the battle, and many people died on both sides. It is interesting here that historians are still not definitely sure who won the battle. Though majority of contemporary historians believe Turks won the battle, the oldest primary written historical sources tell us quite the opposite, that Serbs won the battle, but were subdued by Turks in later ages. The Battle of Kosovo is the most important and best remembered event in the whole history of Southeastern Europe. Nevertheless, Turks defeated all of their opponents in that part of Europe, as well as in Western Asia and North Africa, until they reached the territory right near Vienna, threatening to invade the Western Europe, that is the conquer to whole Europe, and become the greatest world empire ever, replacing the former Roman Empire. When Western European kings realized what would happen, they sent their armies to fight against Turks in the east. Roman popes sent many crusaders, but it was too late, and were defeated in almost every single battle by Turks. The Asian world conquerors seemed unstoppable. There was another battle in Kosovo Field, in 1448, when Turks were victorious, as well as in many other battles during those times against Western Europeans, such as the Battle of Nicopolis in 1395 or the Battle of Varna in 1444. They were also known as the Ottoman Turks, and their empire was called the Ottoman Empire, probably named after their first ruler called Osman, after whom their dynasty was also called the Ottoman dynasty. Beside the mentioned Turkish Sultan Murad I, one of their most relevant rulers was Sultan Mahmud II, or Mahmud the Conqueror, famous for the conquest of Constantinople. He was the one who destroyed the Eastern Roman Empire, or the so-called Byzantine Empire, in 1453. Equally important and famous Turkish ruler and conqueror was Sultan Suleiman I, or Suleiman the Magnificent, who lived in the 16th century. He was the one who tried to conquer Vienna and invade Western Europe. However, Turks were defeated and had to retreat. That event is known as the Siege of Vienna in 1529. The second and last attempt of invading Vienna and Western Europe was the Battle of Vienna in 1683, when the joint forces of the Holy Roman Empire and Polish-Lithuanian Kingdom, Commonwealth, led by Polish King John II Sobieski, defeated Turkish forces. Now before we say more about that period of history and the decline of this new world empire, we should say something about the earlier mentioned medieval European kingdoms. and then about the medieval history of non-European kingdoms. Concerning the mentioned Serbian people, they came to Balkan from north just like other South Slavic tribes, that is, the South Slavic tribes, including Croats and Bulgarians. These nations converted to Christianity, precisely the Eastern Orthodox Christianity, in the 9th century, after two Greek Christian missionaries were sent to their kingdoms by Eastern Roman emperors. Their names were Constantine, called Cyril, and Methodius, who also devised the Old Slavic Glagolitic alphabet and the modern-day Cyrillic alphabet, named after Cyril. The greatest southeastern ruler was the Bulgarian Emperor Simeon the Great, who ruled in the 9th and the 10th century, during the period of decline of the Eastern Roman Empire. His father was the Bulgarian ruler Boris, or Michael, who was the first among Bulgarians to accept Christianity. Regarding the adjacent Serbian people, their most famous ruling dynasty was Nemanjić, or Nemanjić dynasty, who ruled Serbian lands for 2 centuries. The most powerful Serbian ruler was the Emperor Stefan Dušan, who had the title of Emperor, or Tsar, despite the fact that only the Eastern Roman emperors pretended the right to held the emperor title, that is, the title of the world ruler, as it was considered in those times. Actually, the Serbian Emperor Dušan the Powerful planned to conquer Constantinople and proclaimed himself for a new world ruler, but he suddenly died before starting the conquest. Not long after his death, the Serbian Empire collapsed, and the Turks invaded all Serbian lands until they conquered the southeastern Europe. One of the reasons Turks easily subdued all those European kingdoms is that those kingdoms were mostly waging wars between each other, while the Turks used those situations and sometimes would support one of the sides, until they conquered both of them. Now let us say a few words about some of the non-European civilizations. Far out in the east, the Chinese civilization was growing without much contact with the rest of the world, or the so-called Old World civilizations in Europe, though it did have commerce contacts with them since the ancient ages. Likewise, during the Arabian conquest of the world, the Chinese cultural and scientific influence spread on the Western world civilization together with the Arabian. The most obvious example of inventions of those times was the printing machine in Europe in the 15th century, though Chinese invented it several centuries earlier. During the so-called Middle Ages period, that is, during the period from the 5th until the 15th century, there were numerous Chinese ruling dynasties alternating on the throne of the greatest Eastern Asian civilization. One of the most known Chinese dynasty was the Tang dynasty, which ruled from the beginning of the 7th century until the 10th century. It was exactly during its rule when Chinese science, culture, and art were at their climax. This period of Chinese history is usually called the Golden Age of China. However, as it was usually the case, after the Golden Age period came the worst period of Chinese history, during the 10th century. It is called the Five Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms period, referring to a period of political turmoil and wars between the Chinese themselves. The so-called Song dynasty prevailed around 960 AD and reunited the Chinese Empire. It was during their reign that gunpowder became an integral part of Chinese warfare. The greatest enemy of China were Mongol tribes in the north. Exactly during the reign of Song dynasty, Mongols formed their world empire, conquered China, and proclaimed themselves as the new rulers of China, until their demise in the same 13th century. After them, the Ming dynasty came to rule over China, probably as the most famous and most remembered Chinese dynasty, which ruled from the 14th until the 17th century, making it the last medieval Chinese dynasty, if we are to use the modern periodization of history. As far as India is concerned, their civilization was similar to that of China, regarding their culture, their numerous dynasties, and various kingdoms that often existed at the same time. Only during short periods was there a unified empire, and usually under the rule of foreign rulers and nations. Some of the Indian dynasties that ruled over different parts of the Indian subcontinent during the so-called Middle Ages were the Rashtrakuta dynasty, which ruled from the 6th until the 10th century, Chalukya's dynasty that ruled until the 13th century, then the Yadava dynasty that ruled from the 9th until the 14th century, the Ganga dynasty that ruled from the 4th all the way to the 15th century until the end of the medieval period, though it was divided into Eastern and Western Ganga dynasty, as many others were. The Chola dynasty that ruled southern India from the ancient times until the 13th century, making it the longest ruling Indian dynasty, and many other dynasties and kingdoms stretching from the Indus River on the west to Malayan Peninsula in the east, and from Himalayan mountains on the north to Indian Ocean in the south. India, as well as China, has a very long and rich history, much longer than any European nation's history, since there are more preserved historical sources about the ancient times. Some of the medieval Indian dynasties ruled their large and small kingdoms even during the early modern age, such as the Ahom kingdom, Gajapati kingdom, Vijayanagara Empire, the kingdom of Mysore, and so on. Nevertheless, the most known and powerful medieval Indian kingdom was the so-called Delhi Sultanate, which ruled over the northern India from 13th until the 16th century. It was the kingdom established by Muslims from Central Asia, who were of Persian and Turkic origin. Though Indians first met with the religion of Islam already in the 8th century, during the Arabian conquests, this was the first time Islam became the religion of the Indian subcontinent, and the first time Muslims ruled over many of their kingdoms. The first dynasty of Delhi Sultanate was the Turkic Mamluk dynasty. So while the so-called Seljuk Turks, or the Ottoman Turkish Empire, ruled over Western Asia and Europe, these Turkish tribes ruled over Central and South Asia, eventually conquering the whole of India. The rulers of the Delhi Sultanate also defeated the armies of the great Mughal Empire. However, the Delhi Sultanate was destroyed and defeated by Mughal kings, who were of Persian and Turkic origins as well, thus forming the Mughal Empire of India in the 16th century. Using gunpowder and artillery, the Mughal kings utterly defeated the last ruler of the Delhi Sultanate from the Lodi dynasty in the Battle of Panipat in 1526. The same year, Ottoman Turks conquered Hungary after defeating them in the Battle of Mohacs. That will be all for now. Thank you for watching Edupedia World Video.